They thought corporate protection would shield them forever. Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker had spent months believing that their systematic torture campaigns, assassination attempts, and brutal assaults on Roman Reigns were not only tolerated but actively encouraged by WWE's executive leadership, who viewed their violence as valuable entertainment content. But Adam Pearce just delivered the most shocking termination announcement in wrestling history, and when you discover the real reason he fired these two monsters, you're going to realize that some actions are so unforgivably evil that they transcend corporate politics, stockholder interests, and entertainment value to become moral crimes that demand immediate justice regardless of the financial consequences or the corporate chaos that follows when authority figures finally choose human decency over profitable brutality. The announcement that sent shockwaves through the wrestling world happened at exactly 9:23 a.m. during what was supposed to be a routine corporate meeting about upcoming storyline development and performer safety protocols following recent incidents involving systematic violence against contracted talent. Pearce walked into that boardroom like a man who had made an irreversible decision, one executive later recalled with obvious concern about the implications. Not just professionally determined or corporately focused, but morally transformed into someone who had moved beyond institutional loyalty into the realm of fundamental human principle. But what Adam Pearce revealed to WWE's board of directors wasn't just news about disciplinary action or corporate policy changes, it was the explosive exposure of systematic corporate conspiracy that had enabled and financially rewarded the most brutal torture campaigns in wrestling history. Effective immediately, Pearce's voice cut through the assembled executives like a moral judgment that transcended corporate hierarchy. Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker are terminated from WWE for systematic torture, attempted murder, and participation in corporate-sponsored terrorism against contracted performers. The clinical precision with which Pearce described their crimes sent visible terror through board members who realized that their own participation in enabling systematic violence was about to be exposed to legal authorities and public scrutiny. But their termination isn't just about individual accountability. Pearce continued with systematic exposure of the broader conspiracy. It's about ending WWE's participation in systematic torture programs that have transformed sports entertainment into criminal enterprise designed to eliminate independent performers through deliberate violence and psychological warfare. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of Pearce's announcement wasn't just the termination of Reed and Breakker, it was his systematic exposure of the corporate executives who had authorized, funded, and protected their torture campaigns against Roman Reigns and other independent-minded performers. Board members in this room voted to allocate $2.5 million for enhanced performer management services, Pearce announced, with documentation that would destroy careers and result in federal charges. Corporate funds that were specifically designated to pay Reed and Breakker for systematic torture, assassination attempts, and psychological warfare designed to eliminate Roman Reigns as a threat to institutional control. The systematic corporate funding of torture operations revealed WWE's executive leadership as a criminal organization that had weaponized entertainment industry resources to conduct systematic elimination campaigns against their own employees. Nick Khan personally signed authorization documents for physical conditioning protocols. Pearce continued his exposure of corporate complicity, euphemistic language that authorized systematic torture while maintaining plausible deniability about the criminal nature of approved operations. But Pearce's most explosive revelation concerned his discovery that Reed and Breakker's systematic torture of Roman wasn't isolated criminal activity but part of comprehensive corporate strategy to eliminate all independent performers who threatened institutional authority through comprehensive violence and psychological destruction. Project Compliance, Pearce announced with classified documentation that revealed the scope of corporate criminal conspiracy, a systematic program designed to eliminate performer independence through torture, assassination, and psychological warfare, with Reed and Breakker serving as primary operational assets. The existence of a named corporate program for systematic performer elimination revealed WWE as more than entertainment company. It was systematic torture operation that had infiltrated sports entertainment to conduct elimination campaigns against cultural figures who possessed independence or influence. 23 wrestlers have been systematically targeted. Pearce continued with horror at the comprehensive scope of corporate criminal activity, with Reed and Breakker conducting torture operations, assassination attempts, and psychological warfare designed to eliminate independence and ensure institutional compliance. But perhaps the most personally devastating aspect of Pearce's revelations was his discovery that his own position as general manager had been created specifically to provide corporate cover for systematic torture operations while maintaining the appearance of legitimate authority and performer protection. My role was designed as institutional camouflage, Pearce revealed with heartbreak at his own unwitting complicity in systematic criminal activity. Corporate executives needed someone with credibility and performer respect to provide cover for torture operations by maintaining the appearance that WWE protected talent safety and well-being. The systematic deception that had transformed Pearce from legitimate authority into unwitting accomplice revealed corporate manipulation that extended beyond simple criminal conspiracy into comprehensive institutional fraud designed to enable torture while maintaining public credibility. Every disciplinary decision I made, every safety protocol I implemented, every performer protection measure I announced was actually designed to provide corporate cover for systematic torture operations, Pearce continued with recognition of how thoroughly he had been manipulated. But standing in that boardroom, confronted with documented evidence of his own unwitting participation in systematic corporate torture programs, Adam Pearce made the decision that would define his legacy and potentially save countless performers from systematic elimination. "I refuse to continue serving as institutional cover for corporate terrorism," Pearce announced with moral authority that transcended executive hierarchy and corporate loyalty. Reed and Breaker's termination is just the beginning of systematic accountability that will eliminate every person who participated in torture programs disguised as entertainment industry strategy. The transformation from corporate compliance to moral resistance revealed Pearce as someone who possessed the character strength to choose fundamental human principles over institutional loyalty when forced to confront systematic evil. Every board member who voted for torture funding, every executive who authorized assassination attempts, every corporate officer who provided cover for systematic violence, all of you are now facing consequences that will eliminate your ability to continue victimizing performers. Pearce continued his declaration of war against institutional torture programs. But Pearce's most shocking announcement concerned his systematic exposure of corporate torture operations to federal authorities, ensuring that Reed and Breaker's individual crimes would be understood as part of comprehensive criminal conspiracy rather than isolated performer misconduct. FBI investigators are reviewing complete documentation, Pearce revealed with satisfaction, that sent panic through corporate executives, evidence of systematic torture funding, assassination authorization, and corporate conspiracy to eliminate performers through violence and psychological warfare. The involvement of federal law enforcement elevated Reed and Breaker's termination from simple disciplinary action to criminal prosecution that could result in life sentences and complete destruction of WWE's corporate structure. RICO charges, conspiracy to commit murder, systematic abuse of employees under federal protection. The evidence I provided could result in criminal prosecution for every executive who participated in Project Compliance, Pearce continued with recognition of the legal implications. But perhaps the most immediate consequence of Pearce's revelations was the systematic collapse of corporate protection for torture operations, leaving Reed and Breaker completely vulnerable to legal prosecution and personal retaliation from their victims. Corporate lawyers have been instructed to provide no legal support, Pearce announced, with systematic elimination of institutional protection, no financial assistance, no public relations support. Reed and Breaker are now facing individual accountability for every crime they committed in service of corporate torture programs. The complete abandonment of corporate support revealed institutional recognition that association with systematic torture operations created more legal liability than cutting ties and allowing individual prosecution of torture operatives. Reed and Breaker are discovering that corporate authority only protects criminals as long as their crimes remain profitable and hidden, Pearce observed with satisfaction at the systematic betrayal of former assets. But standing in that boardroom, having systematically exposed corporate torture programs and eliminated institutional protection for criminal operatives, Pearce delivered his most powerful statement about performer protection and the fundamental transformation of WWE's relationship with talent safety. "This company will no longer participate in systematic torture of contracted performers," Pearce declared with finality that suggested permanent institutional change. "Every policy, every corporate decision, every executive action will be evaluated based on whether it protects performer safety or enables systematic violence against people who trusted us with their careers and their lives." The comprehensive reform that Pearce promised elevated Reed and Breaker's termination beyond individual discipline into systematic institutional transformation designed to eliminate corporate torture programs permanently. "Wrestling should be about athletic competition and entertainment value," Pearce continued with vision of industry reform, not systematic torture and performer elimination designed to serve corporate control objectives through deliberate violence and psychological destruction. But perhaps the most significant outcome of Pearce's announcement was the immediate impact on other WWE performers who realized that systematic torture operations were finally facing institutional resistance and legal consequences. Every wrestler who had been threatened by Reed and Breaker suddenly understood that their nightmare was over, a locker room source revealed with obvious relief. That corporate protection for torture operations had been eliminated and their tormentors would face individual accountability for every crime they had committed. The systematic elimination of corporate torture programs provided hope that wrestling could return to legitimate competition rather than criminal elimination campaigns disguised as sports entertainment. Performers started talking openly about systematic abuse they had suffered, the source continued, with growing solidarity against institutional torture, understanding that corporate cover for torture operations had been eliminated and their victimization could finally be acknowledged and prosecuted. But Pearce's most emotionally powerful moment came when he directly addressed Roman Reigns and other victims of systematic corporate torture, apologizing for institutional failure while promising comprehensive justice for everyone who had participated in their systematic elimination. "Roman," Pearce's voice carried genuine emotion as he acknowledged corporate failure, "I failed you as general manager, I failed you as someone responsible for performer safety, and I failed you by unknowingly providing cover for corporate torture programs that nearly cost you your life and your career. The personal accountability that Pearce demonstrated revealed someone who understood that institutional position created moral responsibility for systematic failures even when individual complicity was unknowing rather than deliberate. But Reed and Breaker will never again have the opportunity to hurt you or any other performer, Pearce promised, with systematic elimination of torture threats, and every corporate executive who enabled their crimes will face consequences that eliminate their ability to continue authorizing systematic violence against contracted talent. But perhaps the most immediate practical outcome of Reed and Breaker's termination was the comprehensive security review that revealed the scope of systematic torture operations and the number of other performers who had been targeted for similar elimination campaigns. Security footage review revealed systematic patterns, Pearce announced, with evidence of comprehensive torture programs, coordinated attacks, strategic targeting, systematic torture techniques, all documented evidence of corporate-sponsored terrorism rather than isolated performer misconduct. The systematic nature of torture operations revealed Reed and Breaker as professional operatives rather than individual criminals, suggesting comprehensive corporate torture infrastructure that required systematic elimination rather than individual discipline. Medical records showed systematic poison attempts. Pearce continued with horror at the comprehensive scope of torture operations, psychological warfare campaigns, even family intimidation, evidence of corporate terrorism that extended far beyond individual wrestling conflicts into systematic elimination programs. But standing in that boardroom, having systematically exposed corporate torture operations while ensuring individual accountability for torture operatives, Pearce delivered his final statement about institutional transformation and the permanent elimination of systematic performer abuse. Reed and Breaker's termination represents more than individual discipline, Pearce concluded, with recognition of the broader implications. It represents WWE's institutional choice to prioritize performer safety over profitable torture, human dignity over systematic violence, and authentic competition over criminal elimination campaigns. The moral framework that Pearce established for institutional reform provided hope that wrestling could be transformed from corporate torture operation into legitimate sports entertainment that protected rather than systematically abused contracted performers. This company will be judged by whether we protect performers or enable their systematic torture, Pearce continued, with accountability that transcended individual executive protection, whether we serve authentic competition or corporate elimination programs, whether we choose human dignity or profitable violence. But perhaps the most powerful outcome of Pearce's announcement was the immediate industry-wide recognition that systematic torture operations would no longer be tolerated and that corporate protection for performer elimination would be systematically eliminated through moral leadership and legal consequences. Other wrestling companies started reviewing their own policies, and industry analysts observed with satisfaction at the broader reform implications, understanding that corporate tolerance for systematic torture created legal liability and moral bankruptcy that would eventually face overwhelming consequences. The wrestling world was struggling to process Adam Pearce's shocking termination of Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker, and his systematic exposure of corporate torture programs that had transformed sports entertainment into criminal enterprise designed to eliminate independent performers through systematic violence. But most importantly, Pearce had proven that some people possess the moral courage to choose fundamental human principles over corporate loyalty when confronted with systematic evil, and that institutional authority could be used to protect rather than enable performer abuse. Pearce's decision to fire Reed and Breakker wasn't just about individual discipline, one final observer noted with recognition of the broader transformation. It was about institutional choice between human dignity and profitable torture, between performer protection and systematic elimination, between authentic leadership and corporate criminal conspiracy. The termination that shocked WWE had become the transformation that could save wrestling, proving that moral courage could overcome institutional corruption and that systematic torture operations would eventually face elimination by leaders who refused to compromise fundamental human principles for corporate profit or entertainment value. Adam Pearce had chosen justice over corporate loyalty, and his decision had eliminated systematic torture while establishing template for institutional reform that prioritized performer safety over profitable violence against people who trusted their careers and their lives to companies that should protect rather than systematically destroy them.